the skis. But then the boat pulled me. That's when things started to go wrong. It was like snorkeling underwater really fast. I heard a barracuda go, "What the hell was that?" And I water ski mostly with my face. And I would bob my head out of the water periodically, to scream for help. It wasn't an audible scream. It came out like, "Ah!" Killer whales are following. They're curious and a little concerned. Well, everybody's here. Who's that? He doesn't look like us, but he sure sounds like us in pain. Let him go. He's just a baby. My friends thought I was being funny. John, you were so funny. When you were bobbing your head out of the water, I was laughing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe either. You should have stopped the boat.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Delta Force Thursday, July the 6th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Loeren Boebert, Fox News, Leo-Terrell, and Squawk Box, and Part 1 of Chapter 1 of Delta Force by Command Sergeant Major Haney. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Love.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
All rational action is, in the first place, individual action. Only the individual thinks. Only the individual reasons. Only the individual acts. Ludwig von Mises. You are seeing here a key philosophical tenet in market economics versus Marxian collectivism. A high view of human dignity leads to a high view of the individual, of man as unique and special in his or her context as an image bearer of God. The Marxian view is that history is inevitable and unconcerned with the individual. Material forces will bring the individual along, but the individual will play no noteworthy role in the direction of mankind. The subordination of the individual to a collective is a foundational view of those who oppose free enterprise. That collectives reflect that rational acts of individuals is the foundational view of those who cherish free enterprise.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So who is the true conservative? He is the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He is the person that understands that culture trumps politics. He's not selfish, but minds his own business. He does not go looking for trouble. He is alert. He curbs his curiosity, and he acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He is judgmental and moralizes. He refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why, rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that being a true conservative is best, or you are wasting your time. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative suggested federal political priorities? Number 1, recognize that the government has no rights. 2, defund Planned Parenthood. 3, replace the Affordable Care Act. 4, institute zero-based budgeting. 5, prohibit collective bargaining for all public employees. 6, assign criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. 7, immediately repeal the Patriot Act. 8, immediately repeal all emergency dictator laws. 9, reinstate writs of outlawry. 10, use taxpayer funds to sponsor recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 11, create a flexible minimum wage. 12, means test health care. 13, immediately and permanently prohibit investment banking by any office holder. And 14, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back hierarchy. Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households. Integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and nonprofit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Fox News with Senator John Kennedy.
Please, the whistleblower. Here's a quote from him. He says, none of the three were involved in the underlying investigation during Gary's tenure, to my knowledge. What they're talking about are three prosecutors who apparently worked on Hunter Biden's case for 5 years, and then they were removed recently. What would explain why that would happen, or is that just a regular course in law?
Well, that's why we need the fact. I mean, just look at this from 35,000 feet. Let's suppose you're an important government official, Bill, and very powerful, and your grown kid comes home one day and says, Dad, good news. A bunch of Russian companies and Chinese companies and Romanian companies and Ukrainian companies have just hired me. They're giving me millions of dollars to give them advice about stuff I don't know anything about. Now, what are you going to do as a responsible government official? You're not going to say, don't tell me anything about it, but be sure and share some with your sister. You're going to try to find out what's going on. And the White House's story is that the president knew nothing about any of this. And, I mean, it just doesn't pass the smell test.
Please, the whistleblower.
So that was Fox News interviewing John Kennedy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Craft and torture. The specific techniques used in the modern world to break man's mind and will and to extort confessions for political propaganda purposes are relatively new and highly refined. Yet, enforced confession itself is nothing new. From time immemorial, tyrants and dictators have needed these voluntary confessions to justify their own evil deeds. The knowledge that the human mind can be influenced, tamed, and broken down into servility is far older than the modern dictatorial concept of enforced indoctrination. The primitive shaman used awe-inspiring ritual to bring his victim into such a state of fright hypnosis that he yielded to all suggestions. The native on whom a spell of doom has been cast by the medicine man may become so hypnotized by his own fear that he simply sits down, accepts his fate, and dies. Malinowski. Throughout history, men have had an intuitive understanding that the mind can be manipulated. Elaborate strategies have been worked out to achieve this end. Ecstasy rituals, frightening masks, loud noises, eerie chants, all have been used to compel the crowd to accept the beliefs of their leaders. Even if an ordinary man at first resists a cruel shaman or medicine man, the hypnotizing ritual gradually breaks his will. More painful methods are not new either. When we study the old reports of the Inquisition or of the many witch trials, both in Europe and America, we learn a great deal about these methods. The floating test is one example. Those accused of witchcraft were thrown into the river, their feet and hands tied together. If the body did not sink, the victim was immediately pulled out of the water and burned at the stake. The fact that he did not sink was proof positive of his guilt. If, on the other hand, the accused obeyed the law of gravity and sank to the bottom of the river, then the drowned body was ceremoniously removed from the river and proclaimed innocent. Not much choice was left to the victim. Man has been tremendously inventive in developing means for inflicting suffering on his fellow man. With refined passion, he has devised techniques which provoke the most exquisite pain in the most vulnerable parts of the human body. The rack and the thumbscrew are age-old instruments and have been used not only by primitive judges, but also by so-called civilized dictators and tyrants. In order better to understand modern mental torture, we must constantly keep in mind the fact that from the earliest days, bodily anguish and the rack were never meant merely to inflict pain on the victim. They might not have expressed their understanding in sophisticated terms, but the medieval judge and hangman were nevertheless aware that there is a peculiar spiritual relationship and mental interplay between the victim and the rest of the community. Much painful torture and hanging had to be done as public demonstrations. After suffering the most intense pain, the witch would not only confess to shocking sexual debaucheries with the devil, but would herself gradually come to believe the stories she had invented and would die, convinced of her guilt. The whole ritual of interrogation and torture finally compelled her to yield to the fantasies of her judges and accusers. In the end, she even yearned for death. She wanted to be burned at the stake in order to exorcise the devil and expiate her sins. These same judges and hangman realized, too, that their witch trials were intended not only to torture the witches, but even more to torture the bystanders who, albeit unconsciously, identified themselves with the victims. This is, of course, one of the reasons burnings and hangings were held in public and became the occasion for great pageants. Terror thus became widespread, and many judges spoke euphemistically of the preventative action of such torture. Psychologically, we can see this entire device as blackmailing of human sympathy and the general tendency to identify with others. As far back as 1563, the courageous Dutch physician Johannes Weir published his masterwork on delusions about demons, in which he states that the collective and voluntary self-accusation of older women, through which they exposed themselves to torture and death by their inquisitors, was in itself an act inspired by the devil, a trick of demons, whose aim it was to doom not only the innocent women, but also their reckless judges. Weir was the first medical man to introduce what became the psychiatric concept of delusion and mental blindness. Wherever his book had influence, the persecution of witches ceased. In some countries, more than 150 years before it was finally brought to an end throughout the civilized world. His work and his insights became one of the main instruments for fighting the witch delusion and physical torture, Auschwitz. Weir realized even then that witches were scapegoats for the inner confusion and desperation of their judges and of the zeitgeist in general. The refinement of the rack. All knowledge can be used either for good or for evil, and psychology is not immune to this general law. Psychology has delivered up to man new means of torture and intrusion into the mind.
And that was The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Loeren Boebert.
We have members of Congress continuing to fight for us on a regular basis to ensure that our freedoms, like speech, like our right to keep and bear arms, are not infringed. One of those members of Congress, of course, is Republican Congresswoman from Colorado, talking about Loeren Boebert. Congresswoman, it's great to see you.
Grant, great to be with you. I am back home in my district this week. It's wonderful to be out of the swamp and here with you and all your viewers.
Well, I'm jealous in the heat of Dallas that you're in Colorado, where I'm sure it is much cooler than 105 degrees here in Dallas. But with that said, Congresswoman, do you agree that this ruling, though important, may not have the effect we hope for because they're all in cahoots together? I'm not sure they need to talk to each other to silence us.
Grant, we've known for months that the White House, big tech, and the federal agencies have been colluding for months to target and censor conservatives who disagree with their communist-like agenda. The FBI worked with Twitter to prevent the Hunter Biden laptop story from spreading. They did not want this story to be released to the public because they knew that it would impact their election. And if it weren't for the Missouri and Louisiana attorney generals taking a stand and getting the injunction in place, big tech and the Biden administration would continue this Orwellian type of behavior, and it would continue into the next election and maybe even beyond. 1,400 facts and 20,000 pages of evidence they found involving the censorship. This is a major victory for our First Amendment right. This victory will go on for quite some time, and tyrants and dictators have historically tried to censor the press and their people. So that should never occur in the land of the free. And Grant, one of the greatest rights that we have in America is our freedom of speech. So I am very grateful that these attorney generals have stepped up and obtained this amazing victory on behalf of so many Americans and our freedom of speech.
All right, so what happens if Facebook, YouTube, doesn't talk to the Biden administration or the government and just deems something disinformation and decides to take it down? Are we out of luck?
You know, we certainly have seen this in the past. Section 230 is certainly still an issue. I serve on the Oversight Committee, and this is something that Chairman Jamie Comer and myself and other members of the committee are working on. We've had the Twitter files hearing part 1. Hopefully there are many more parts to these hearings that take place that actually expose the revolving door between the FBI and big tech. Certainly, big tech and the people who are working for them and in these in this industry want to help promote the Democrat agenda and everything that is going on in the Biden administration. They want to cover up these stories and not allow the American people to actually receive the truth of what is going on. And so myself, Chairman Comer, and others, we are there to expose all of the lies and the corruption to ensure that the American people are able to get the information that they need to make informed decisions, especially when it comes to election time. The 2024 election is a lot closer than a lot of us seem to accept, and that is something that we have to have our sights on. So myself and other members of Congress are working diligently each and every day to make sure that we are actually fact-checking what is being put out to the American viewers and the listeners so they can make this informed decision rather than these phony fact-checkers that we see online working for the big tech industry.
Well, I'll tell you, I use a burner phone to use TikTok, and I use TikTok only because I know there are young conservatives there and I want to reach them. So I use a burner phone so China can't track me. They already censored me when I made a declaration that Joe Biden was the most prolific sex trafficker in American history with his open border policies. So they shut that post down very swiftly. And I don't know how you make an argument that it's not true, because it absolutely is. Talking about Joe Biden, though, before I let you go, Hunter Biden now, there is an email going back to when Joe Biden was vice president that Hunter Biden was CC'd on this email to Joe Biden about a call with Ukrainian president, the former Ukrainian president. Let me read the email to you, and then tell me, Congresswoman Boebert, what you think this means, because Joe Biden says, hey, I don't talk to my son about business dealings, and this was about Ukraine. It reads, boss, 8:45 a.m., prep for 9 a.m. phone call with President Poroshenko, then we're off to Rhode Island for infrastructure event, and then Wilmington for University of Delaware commencement. Nate will have your draft remarks. Okay, it goes on. Hunter Biden is CC'd on that. At that time, he's working for Burisma. This is about a meeting with Poroshenko. This is just more evidence, isn't it, that the two are connected? This pay-to-play scheme continues.
So Grant, again, serving on the Oversight Committee, this is something that we are actively looking into. We aren't only looking into Hunter Biden and his business dealings, but we are looking into the big guy because we see so many correlations where he was in direct contact with Hunter Biden and these Russian oligarchs and these oil and gas industries who said that we know he's not smart, but we're putting him on our board because we know that his dad will take care of us. That's something I saw in an unclassified document in a skiff in the United States Capitol that the American people aren't allowed to read. You and I have discussed that. But we all knew that the Biden crime family was corrupt from the get-go. We knew about the Hunter Biden laptop. We knew about the shady deals in foreign nations. We knew about Joe Biden bribing the Ukrainian president, not Zelensky at the time, to fire the prosecutor in exchange for money. We have since learned the Biden corruption continued as Hunter Biden was CC'd in a scheduling email with then Vice President Joe Biden about a call between Joe and the Ukrainian president. This all happened while Hunter Biden was on the freaking board of Burisma, one of the largest energy producers in Ukraine. We also have an FBI informant claiming to possess evidence that show Joe Biden and Hunter Biden received at least $5 million each in bribes from Burisma. We cannot allow these criminals to continue to run our country unchecked, and that is exactly what we are focused on in the 118th Congress and in the Oversight Committee. And Grant, I can't let this segment go without saying, as a sitting member of the United States Congress, I too feel I need a burner phone.
You probably do. And I promise you, they're probably trying to find out every communication you have with the lengths this government will go to spy on good, freedom-loving patriots. It's very, very sad.
It is.
Lastly, to me, I spelled out, I guess it was Friday, at least 12 times Joe Biden lied about not having any contact with his son about business dealings overseas. This email, there is no reason Hunter Biden would be CC'd on an email to then Vice President about Ukraine unless it had something to do with the deal being played out, and Hunter needed to know that it was going on as planned out, mission accomplished.
You know, I think everything in this administration has been mission accomplished, from overspending, overregulating, causing inflation, open border policies. As you mentioned, the sex trafficking that is taking place because of these open border policies. All of this seems intentional, willful, on purpose, and deliberate. And that is why I provoked impeachment hearings to begin in the Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives against Joe Biden, because I feel that this is a complete dereliction of duty and that it is willful and intentful that he is destroying so much of our country. We see all the corruption with the Biden crime family and the shell companies and the tens of millions of dollars that they have received in very shady circumstances, seemingly. But every other policy that comes out of this administration only causes further harm to the hardworking American people that I was elected to serve. And I am bound and determined to make it right by them every step of the way, each and every day, represent them and reflect the good, hard American working values that I promise to represent in Washington, D.C. And that includes exposing the corruption coming out of Washington, D.C. and the willful intent to destroy our nation.
Well, it is clear this administration is an absolute disgrace, and the worst part is our national security is suffering because of it.
And that was, it's called Stinchfield Tonight, and his guest was Congresswoman Loeren Boebert from Colorado. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Leo-Terrell.
Leo, what is the solution here? How is it that these Democrats continue to blame and not tackle the main thrust of what is happening here and not addressing, as Larry talked about, like the breakdown of the family seems like something that is very obvious, but they refuse to talk about it?
Because the Democrats, thanks for the question, the Democrats and the media, 95% of the media, they want the nuclear family to be destroyed. That's what they're doing. They want to take over the family, the livelihood of every person, and have it under government control. Hey, by the way, where's Al Sharpton? Where's Black Lives Matter in Philadelphia? Where's around-the-clock coverage of this incident where there was a mass shooting? Oh, it was a black suspect. So they're not going to play it because they want to play the race card. And when you have a black suspect, that's not the narrative they want to play. They want the white 22-year-old white nationalist. Then you'll see round-the-clock coverage. Look, the Democrats have normalized crime. They have basically accepted. That's why in California, crime is running rampant throughout San Francisco, California. Newsom is traveling all over the country while California burns. And more importantly, the Democrats, Jason, they want to celebrate criminals. That's why they're having their national convention in the crime capital of the world, Chicago. They have no problem with crime, and that's why they basically endorse it.
And that was Leo-Terrell on Fox News Live. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Fox News interviewing Representative Comer.
What is the latest state of the investigation? Are you getting cooperation from the banks? I think last time I heard you had gotten records from, I believe, 4 banks, but there was something like 12. What sort of information are you able to get? What's your biggest hurdle at the moment?
Well, we're up to 6 banks now, Jason, and we're going to have an announcement hopefully next week of more findings. More disturbing findings that we found. Bank records don't lie. People make a big issue out of taxes. People cheat on their taxes all the time, but it's hard to cheat on bank records. We also are requesting more bank violations. We're hoping that Treasury will give us access to more bank violations that we believe would have information on the potential bribery charges that were alleged in the FBI documents. So our investigation's moving along. We're entering the deposition phase. We're going to have Devin Archer will be the first person that was involved in the Hunter Biden business dealings, or whatever you want to call them. He'll be the first person that we depose, and we have a list of who's who that were involved in the Biden organization that we plan on deposing throughout the summer.
What is the latest?
And that was Fox News interviewing Representative Comer. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Squawk Box.
So we won't sell chips. They won't sell us material for chips. Now we're going to do something with the cloud. It keeps going back and forth, retaliatory measures, and yet everybody, we're meeting and smiling at each other like it's business as usual. At the same time, I don't know if you saw 60 Minutes where the Navy, the gentleman that's running our operations over in that part of the world, said we are absolutely there as a deterrent. We're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let Taiwan go. So I just don't understand how to calculate it all and what answer I get. I took calculus, but it's been a while.
Admiral Paparo is one of the great military leaders and commanders in the U.S. forces. You probably know he just got appointed to be Chief of Naval Operations. He's currently the commander of the Pacific Fleet, which runs about 60% of our Navy. One of the things that Admiral Paparo said is the Chinese, have spent the last decade building their Navy to a point where now they exceed the number of ships that the U.S. Navy has. I think they have about 350 ships, and the U.S. Navy has about 330 ships. They only have 2 aircraft carriers. One is an old junker from the Ukraine, and one of them's new. Both of them run on diesel. We have 11 nuclear-powered carriers. They haven't exceeded us yet on the military equipment side, and they're building their Navy, but they are aggressively building their Navy. I've been recently rereading Churchill's famous book, The Gathering Storm. And to your point about these meetings where, remember, our Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, has absolutely begged the Chinese to put a fail-safe line of communication in between our militaries. The Chinese refuse to put a line of communication in. And as their belligerence, both economic belligerence and militaristic belligerence continues, we need these fail-safes in place. And China needs to act as a responsible global actor. And clearly, they didn't during COVID. They're not operating that way now economically, and they're clearly not operating that way militarily. So what you're asking me is to make sense of it. It is clear as day to me that Xi Jinping is planning to move militaristically over Taiwan. The Taiwanese know it. We know it. And we're hoping it doesn't happen. And just like the meetings between Lord Halifax and Neville Chamberlain happened with Hitler and his crew. I know that sounds bombastic, but I'm telling you that history is rhyming right now, and unfortunately, I think we're headed to a very dark place.
And that was Squawk Box. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now is going to be part 1 of In the Beginning from Inside Delta Force by Eric L. Haney, Command Sergeant Major, retired.
In the beginning. C-130 rolling down the strip, airborne ranger on a one-way trip. Mission unspoken, destination unknown. Airborne ranger ain't never coming home. Ranger running cadence. The C-130 transport plane bucked and shook side to side like a malevolent rodeo bull. It's going to be a hell of a ride till we can get out of this baby, I thought, as the big iron bird descended to jump altitude. Then the plane leveled out, and the bouncing and shivering, though still severe, took on a slightly more predictable tempo. Now, it was time. Barely able to move, encased in the weight of parachute, rucksack, equipment harness, and rifle, I lurched to my feet, hooked the parachute's static line to the overhead steel cable, and turned to face the 40 other Rangers still seated on the red nylon benches that ran down the sides and center of the aircraft. I looked at the Air Force loadmaster as he spoke into his microphone and watched for the red jump light to come on. Then, with a sudden whoosh followed by a deafening roar, he and his assistant slid the jump doors into the opened and ready position. Wind howled through the plane and whipped at my legs as I glanced across the plane to my assistant jumpmaster, Sergeant Allie Jones. He nodded that he was ready, and it began. I looked back down the line of expectant men seated in front of me, gave the fuselage floor a powerful stamp with my left foot, threw my hands and arms into the air with my palms facing the men, and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Get ready." The men unbuckled their seatbelts, focused their attention on my assistant and me on the other side of the plane, and sat upright in their seats, ready for the next command. "Outboard personnel, stand up," I shouted, as I pointed to the men seated against the skin of the aircraft. They struggled to their feet in spite of the plane's wild lurching, and when they were in line facing me, I continued the jump commands. "Inboard personnel, stand up." I pointed with extended arms and hands to the men still seated on the centerline seats. With help from their standing comrades, they got to their feet, and the two groups formed into a continuous line. The plane was bouncing and rattling now like an old truck hurtling over a washboarded dirt road, and it was all the men could do to keep their balance. I hope no one starts throwing up. If they do, it'll spread like wildfire, and the floors will become slippery and dangerous. But this was a veteran bunch of jumpers, and no one became airsick, even though the ride was getting worse now that we were on the jump run. "Hook up," I called, extending my arms high overhead and making crooks of my index fingers. Only the first few men in line could hear the commands and understand my voice over the roaring blast coming in the open doors, but everyone could see the hand and arm signals of the jump commands, and it was a code they knew by heart. In unison, the jumpers detached their static line clips from the top of their reserve parachutes, snapped them in place on the overhead steel cable running the length of the fuselage, and inserted the safety wire through the sliding lock. I slid my fingers back and forth over imaginary steel cables. "Check static lines." Every man checked his own static line, and then the line of the man in front of him. This was the crucial check. A fouled static line could kill you. With exaggerated movements, I patted the front of my chest with both hands. "Check equipment." Each ranger checked his helmet, his reserve parachute, his rucksack and lowering line, and his weapon, making sure everything was securely and properly fastened. I placed cupped hands behind my ears and shouted, "Sound off for equipment check." Beginning with the last man in the rear of the plane, the response came up the line, each ranger slapping the ass of the man in front of him and yelling into his ear, "Okay." I heard the muffled reply faintly at first, but it gathered power and speed as the call rippled up the line until the man directly in front of me threw out his hand with the circled fingers of the OK signal, stamped his foot on the aluminum floor, and shouted, "All okay." Now I turned to the open jump door. I checked to make sure my rucksack was securely tied to my upwind leg. Then I took a firm hold of the door frame with my right hand and ran my left hand down the other edge of the door, making sure there was no sharp edge that might cut a static line. Next, I kicked the side locks of the jump platform and gave it a stomp with one foot to make sure it was secure. Satisfied that all was well with the door, I slid my legs forward, hooked my toes over the outer edge of the platform, and with a white-knuckled grip on the frame of the door, arched my back and shoved my entire body outside the plane to perform the first air safety check. The 120-mile-per-hour wind tore at my clothes and equipment and tried to wrest the plane from my tenuous grasp, but I hung on with determination. I still had a job to perform, and we were miles short of the drop zone. First, I looked forward to orient myself, and then I checked for the position of the other planes. Then I looked up to make sure no one was above us, and toward the rear to make certain no one was back there. We were the last plane in the flight, and I was glad to see the other birds all in their proper position. I tilted my head down just a bit so the brim of my helmet helped cut the wind from my eyes, and then concentrated on the ground ahead as I looked for the checkpoints that told me we were approaching Fort Stewart, Georgia, and Taylor's Creek drop zone. In the distance ahead, I caught sight of the huge DZ, showing as a rectangular slab of white sand and scrub brush in an endless green forest. I watched its steady approach, and when it was just in front of the plane's nose, I wrenched myself back inside, pointed to the open doorway, and shouted to the first man in line the phrase that thrills every paratrooper: "Stand in the door." The human energy in the plane crackled as the soldier threw his static line into my waiting hand, put his feet on the jump platform, and grasped the outside of the shuttering doorframe. Knees cocked like levers, arms tensed, he looked with steady eyes straight out the wind-blasted and howling door, waiting for the ultimate command. An 18-year-old private first class, Ricky McGee was the youngest jumper in the plane, but he was showing the steady courage of an old hand. I held him by his parachute harness and looked around the front of his chest as the drop zone slid under the belly of the plane. Then I looked back inside just in time to see the red light extinguished and the green light come on in its place. It was as if a switch had been thrown. My right arm felt electric as I swung it sharply forward, gave the jumper a stinging slap low on the back of his thigh, and yelled into his ear, "Go!" He sprang out the door like he'd been shot from an automatic cannon, while behind him a human conveyor belt of fresh ammo rushed for the breach of the exit door. Slap, go, slap, go, slap, go. The rapidly shortening line of men disappeared from sight as the wildly lunging plane, 1,000 feet above the ground, disgorged its human cargo into the ether. Like Jonahs from the belly of the whale. As the last man hurled himself into space, I looked out the plane and back down at the descending jumpers to make sure no one was hung up on the plane and being dragged to his death. Satisfied that all was okay, I looked to my assistant in the other doorway, who had been doing the same thing. He shouted across to me, "Clear to the rear." I gave him a thumbs up and answered, "Clear," then pointed a finger at him and yelled, "Go." He turned to the door, hesitated the split second he needed to take a good door position, and then launched himself from view. I quickly checked outside and below to see that he had a chute over his head, glanced at the still green jump light, and rocketed myself out the door into the full blast of the air. Tight body position, feet and knees pressed together, hands grasping the ends of the reserve chute, head down with my chin tucked into my chest. I counted. 1,000, 2,000, a hard tug at my back as the parachute was jerked from its pack. 3,000. The drag of the elongated but still unopened chute acted as an air brake, immediately slowing my forward movement, tilting my back toward the earth, and I watched as the tail of the plane sailed past over the tips of my boots. 4,000. A full parachute. Feet once again pointed toward the ground, I checked the canopy. It looked good. No tears in the green fabric and no lines out of place. And after the overwhelming noise inside the airplane, the world is suddenly silent. I grabbed the handles of the control lines and pulled them down to the level of my helmet as I quickly looked all around for other jumpers. Plenty of clear air. I checked for the direction of smoke on the drop zone and then let the parachute fly so that I could also gauge the direction of the wind up here. I let the canopy run with the wind. I was a long way from the assembly point, and I wanted the parachute to take me as close as it possibly could. 200 feet above the ground, I bent my knees so my rucksack would have a ramp to slide off. I reached down and pulled the quick-release tabs to the rucksack and felt it drop free until it hit the end of the 20-foot lowering line with a yank. The tall Georgia pines at the side of the drop zone drifted lazily upward, and when I was level with their tops, I faced the canopy into the wind and prepared to land. Shove the rifle over so that it's not under my armpit, or it'll bend the barrel and dislocate my shoulder when I hit the ground. Legs slightly bent, feet and knees together, elbows in front of the face, hands even with the top of the helmet, and relax. Now, the ground came hurtling upward with amazing speed, and the rucksack hit with a solid thunk. Relax, relax, relax. At a speed of 22 feet per second, I made jolting impact with the earth. Balls of the feet, calves, sides of the thighs, ass, and backs of the shoulders making contact in a practiced rolling sequence that spread the energy of the controlled crash across the length of my body. I heard, as from a distance, the thump and jangle of equipment as my load and I completed our short flight and sudden landing, and then it was over. Everything still works, and any parachute landing is a good one if you can get up and walk away. I came to rest, shucked myself out of the harness, and ran to the canopy to fold and stow it away before a puff of wind could inflate it again. I quickly stuffed my chute into its kit bag, donned my gear, and set out at a fast trot to rejoin my company. Today, we had a rare and unexpected treat. Following an exercise, we usually road marched the 20 miles from the drop zone back to the barracks. But we were returning from a long and arduous month in the jungles of Panama, and we had a lot of work ahead of us cleaning and turning in weapons and equipment, so the colonel had us trucked back to camp instead. 4 hours later, everything was accounted for and back in its proper place. The formation came to attention. The first sergeant called "dismissed," and with a thundering "hoo-ah," the 158 men of Charlie Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, were released for a well-deserved 3-day weekend. I watched my platoon as it immediately disintegrated into individuals and small groups of buddies. I was about to walk away when Glenn Morrell, the battalion command sergeant major, called me to his side. "Sergeant Haney, I want you to report to the battalion conference room and meet someone who'd like to speak with you." "Certainly, Sergeant Major," I said. "Who is it?" "He's an old friend of mine, and I think you'll find what he has to say pretty interesting," he replied, with the lopsided smile that habitually adorned his rugged face. "He's waiting for you now." "Wilco, Sergeant Major. I'm on my way." And with a salute, I moved out sharply in the direction of battalion headquarters. I thought the world of Sergeant Major Morrell. A practical yet deeply thoughtful man, he is that very rare combination of action and intellect. Morrell had come to us the previous year after our former Sergeant Major, Henry Caro, had been killed on a parachute jump. With the battalion's reputation as a hardship posting, no other Sergeant Major in the Army would come to join us. When Morrell heard that no Ranger-qualified Sergeant Major would accept the assignment, he volunteered, and at age 42 attended Ranger School so he could accept the posting as Command Sergeant Major. He was as hard as woodpecker lips, and he had my utter respect. If he wanted me to meet Beelzebub himself, I was confident it was all for the best. The meeting in the conference room turned out to be an interview to attend tryouts for a secretive new unit that was forming at Fort Bragg, the one we had been hearing rumors about. The man I spoke with was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark, well-combed hair, penetrating brown eyes, and a hint of tin-roof twang in his voice. He was dressed in civvies, never gave his name, and told me damn little about his organization. I later came to know him as Sergeant Major William Country Grimes, the man hand-picked by Colonel Charlie Beckwith to be his Sergeant Major. He had my personnel records open on the table in front of him, and he glanced at them occasionally as we talked about my career, about the units I had been in, and the assignments I had held to that point. He told me this was a chance to be a charter member of a unit that would be unique in the American military, the nation's first unit dedicated to fighting international terrorism. The prerequisites to try out were minimum age of 22, minimum time in service of 4 years and 2 months, minimum rank of staff sergeant, pass a 100-meter swim test while wearing boots and fatigues, and pass the Ranger Special Forces PT test. Have a minimum score of 110 on the Army General Aptitude Test, no court-martial convictions, and no record of recurring disciplinary problems. About the only other thing Grimes told me was that if I was accepted, I could expect hard work, plenty of danger, and no recognition. I had been thinking a great deal lately about what I wanted to do after my assignment with the Rangers. I didn't know if I wanted to go back overseas again or into Special Forces. I was positive of one thing. I didn't want to be detailed as an instructor at a school somewhere. But since I had just been picked up for promotion to Sergeant First Class and had never had a non-tactical assignment, that was a distinct possibility. I had a fair number of options, but none sounded as good as what I had just heard. Given all this, I signed up on the spot. Grimes told me to expect orders soon to come to Bragg for about a month. He gave me a phone number to call if I had any questions or changed my mind about coming. And that was it. Just a few weeks later, I received orders directing me to report to Moon Hall at Fort Bragg on or about noon, 13 September, 1978.
And that was part one of In the Beginning from Inside Delta Force by Eric L. Haney, Command Sergeant Major, retired. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.